Absolutely. Thank you for the intro, and it's great to follow the chat and get a sense of who's in the room. Lots of new faces for me, so great to meet you all, and I'll start sharing my slides now. There we go. So I'll say more shortly about We All, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, but this is our mission as an organisation, changing the rules of the economy to deliver good lives for all within planetary boundaries. And I'm hoping with my short presentation today to provide a big picture, maybe even slightly provocative introduction to today's event, looking at the vision of a wellbeing economy and how that fits with community wealth building. So as Sam said, I will say a bit more about the Community Wealth Building Act, but I'm also sure that the vast majority of you are very familiar with community wealth building. You might be familiar with wellbeing economy as well. So I'll introduce both concepts briefly, but I'm mostly going to look at how they fit together and kind of interrogate community wealth building through a wellbeing economy lens, which I hope might be useful before we hear from Tom, which I'm really looking forward to, about the opportunity of repowering and getting into conversation with everybody. So I think it's quite a common start to presentations these days, isn't it, to say there's a lot of reasons to feel a lack of hope these days. And there is a sense that in Scotland, in the UK, in the world, that we're at a crossroads. Feels like we've got different possible futures ahead, but whichever way we go, business as usual is no longer an option. That much is clear. So on the one hand, there's a future of regressing to a crueler version of humanity. We've got growing division, racism, suppression of minorities, and worsening the climate crisis. But I'm an optimist. And on the other hand, there is hope for this moment to act as a catalyst for a more humane future, of taking back control of democracies, creating real prosperity, and opening a new chapter on humanity's road to fulfilling its potential, with care and compassion and joy at the heart of economic systems and living within planetary boundaries. So I love this cartoon, which an Australian cartoonist, Jess Harwood, created recently. Do we exist to serve the economy, or can we create an economy that serves us? And the Wellbeing Economy Alliance aims to highlight that it's the design of our economy that is the root cause of our multiple crises and the rising tensions that we're experiencing today. And people feel that, even if they don't talk about the economy confidently, people feel that despite their hard work, life is not getting better as they've been promised. And if we want to have a chance of going down that second vision of the future, the more humane and joyful route, then we need new ways of envisioning our economy and redesigning it to serve us rather than have us serving it. So this slide is one that I always use when I'm introducing We All's positioning. So the first 3 pillars model there of sustainability is sort of old school sustainability thinking, I would say, with social and environmental and economic policy and practice seen as these separate pillars. We're mostly within our institutions in the middle one, the Venn diagram, where there's recognition of overlaps and trade-offs, but they're still very much seen as these 3 separate spheres and domains. The third image, the concentric circles, is how we think we should envision the economy. The economy is in service of society, and society is embedded within the natural environment, and that's how we should start any conversation about our relationship with the economy and our relationship with nature. So both community wealth building and wellbeing economy have emerged in response to all the challenges that we're facing as ways to reimagine and redesign our economy. And in Scotland right now, the 2 concepts together can form a really important vehicle for those of us that hold out hope for a better future. So a quick bit more about wellbeing economy and how it's conceived. There's a lot of different economic strategies named on this slide. This is by no means exhaustive, but We All, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, is a global movement which is very broad and diverse, and we say it's for anybody who believes that our economic systems should serve us and be focused on well-being. So you'll see some things that you've heard of here, I'm sure: donut economics, the common good economy, solidarity economy, community wealth building. So these are a whole set of strategies. Catherine Trebek, who's one of our co-founders, would say the wellbeing economy is a picnic blanket that we roll out for everyone to join in on, and that the connection and the collaboration between these different strategies is important in building a movement for economic system change. So there is no shortage of hope and no shortage of ideas. And as the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we welcome all of them. And we all emerged as a global movement 8 years ago. We aim to be a sort of rallying point for building a movement of power out of this myriad of ideas and case studies. And we want to build connections, power bases, and share new stories about the economy and generate conversations about how we can shift it. So we all as a global movement, as I said, it's always had very strong roots in Scotland. I was part of the founding team of the global We All organisation 8 years ago, as well as We All Scotland, and I've just transitioned 3 months ago to be the director of We All Scotland now. So Scotland was the first country hub team of We All, seeking to advance the wellbeing economy vision at country level, but there's now 25 in all corners of the world, as you can see in that map, and we're very connected into our peers in all of these places. So to turn to community wealth building, and apologies to those who are extremely familiar with it already, I'll just quickly skip through this because I need to assume that there's at least some people who are not living in it every day. But EDAS define it as a practical approach to local economic development that supports the delivery of a wellbeing economy for Scotland. It delivers action, it gives the people of Scotland a greater stake in economy and wealth, making it work for us and our planet. And then there's the 5 principles of community wealth building: inclusive ownership, obviously very relevant to today's conversation with more inclusive and democratic business models; workforce, increasing fair work; the investment flows under the finance principle, making sure that investment works for local people and is not being extracted from communities; the land and property principle, where communities gain from land and property assets. I think that we're going to get into a lot more detail about that today. And then spending around maximising community benefits through procurement and commissioning with shorter supply chains. And I think that the spending one is where a lot of the focus has been to date in Scotland with anchor institutions, which is really important. But we've got to make sure that when we are talking about community wealth building implementation, we're working across all 5 of these principles. And I'll get into a bit more detail about that. And to briefly introduce the Act, with the passing of this new legislation in Scotland, we have a really exciting opportunity to further push for the redesign of our economy and make it happen in reality. Coming from the global We All team very recently, I can absolutely tell you that the world is watching Scotland. There's a lot of excitement in the wellbeing economy movement and amongst all those other movements that were named on my slide a couple of minutes ago, that this Act exists, that we've redefined economic development in terms of community wealth, and we have the first piece of legislation to do so at a national level. So that's something for us to maybe use strategically. I think that maybe sometimes people who are focused on Scotland all the time don't realise how much attention Scottish policies, and this law in particular, are getting on international stages. So let's use that strategically to push as a race to the top. So a quick summary of some of the provisions of the Act, as well as being the first country to pass such legislation. What it really means is about local economic control. We're hearing a bit more about this at UK level now, not surprisingly from someone who's the Manchester mayor. That might come up in conversation today, but the idea that public bodies must prioritise local suppliers, anchor institutions, which are a really key feature of community wealth building as a strategy, and community-based organisations. Fair work, again, we've got the fair work principles in Scotland, but this actually brings them into legislation and makes them a much harder piece of governance, which is exciting. There's also duties on public bodies around strategic planning, having community wealth building strategies with procurement, investment and economic development, all oriented towards community wealth as the goal. And then the anchor institutions are also employers as well as spenders, which is really key. So as I said, I want to really spend the rest of my time now talking about how the 2 concepts fit together and how we hope that applying a wellbeing economy lens to community wealth building can help us make the most of the potential of this Act. So wellbeing economy and community wealth building do emphasise different ways of working and slightly different lenses. Community wealth building has got roots in economic system change. It was born out of concepts of evolutionary reconstruction of the economy. So they share key values and analyses that the economy was designed and can be redesigned. that inequality and the concentration of wealth and power is a huge driver of all our problems, and that democratisation of the economy is a key solution. So they are very much natural partners. They've built on these shared values in different and complementary ways already. Community wealth building has already got a strong track record as a framework for practical action that can be taken at local level to create change in the economy. And wellbeing economy has a process of bringing people, policymakers, campaigners together to create shared visions and long-term visions and stories of better economies, better decision making, and of trying to build collective power and working across sectoral divides. But despite these similarities, they also do present different lenses when looking at the challenge of redesigning the economy. And I think that opens up a fruitful space for discussion and possibly creative tension and knowledge sharing and inspiration, and hopefully creating something bigger than the sum of its parts from these two concepts. So these are what we call the 5 we all needs. These were co-created years ago with members from across our global network. I expect none of these 5 dimensions, which we say are the design principles for a wellbeing economy, will surprise you, because you find them in Indigenous wisdom, most religions, every single survey when you ask what actually matters to people. But that's what we did basically, was come up with these principles that summarise in a really simple way the different themes that should be guiding the design of our economies. So I'll go through each of these and look at community wealth building through these different we all and wellbeing economy lenses. So for purpose, first of all, our statement here is that the economy should generate less inequality and share wealth more fairly. So that's the purpose that we think should be at the heart of all economic policy and decision making. And community wealth building, just skipped by accident there, community wealth building is very strong on the how and the who of economic development for this purpose. And it's inspired by a vision of a more democratic and equal economy that's locally rooted. But beyond that, the vision or end goal is not always explicit in community wealth building. And that's where the goal of economic system change, of a wellbeing economy as the destination, is really crucial. And it's also important to realise that the transformative potential of the Act means empowering decision makers at all levels to think and operate differently. I worry that there's a risk, worst case scenario, of community wealth building becoming a procurement exercise and not going beyond that to actually transform culture and decision making. So that's why we need this much more holistic approach. The wellbeing economy also highlights that it's important to have an honest conversation about what kinds of economic activities are needed to improve wellbeing. What are the things we really need more of, and what are the things that we already have enough of? What are the things we need to scale down because they're more damaging than helpful, not just to human wellbeing, but also to the planet. So we need to make sure that community wealth building in the coming years is not co-opted to serve an indiscriminate pursuit of economic growth for its own sake, because that would ultimately stop it achieving the goals of economic democracy that it seeks to achieve. I'll go on now to fairness. The economy should generate less inequality, share wealth more fairly. So community wealth building obviously offers a practical inspiration for pre-distribution, which is an absolutely core concept of wellbeing economy. It means that designing fairness into the system so that power, wealth, time, income are equitably shared before problems arise. So if we do that right, the economy does more of the heavy lifting in delivering what we all need. And most of you are involved in social enterprise, so I do not need to tell you that. Inclusive and democratic business models are absolutely crucial for pre-distribution. So that's where community wealth building can bring a lot of inspiration into the wellbeing economy movement with the practical stories and actions. But taking a step back, word of warning on this dimension of fairness is there is a potential for tension. It's important to keep wealth in local communities, but we can't assume that communities are naturally better at distribution. Local landowners or 1 or 2 businesses could appropriate the lion's share of wealth if it's not properly managed for inequality. And we also need to make sure that the goal of keeping wealth in communities doesn't unintentionally exacerbate the wealth inequalities between richer and poorer parts of Scotland. And I'm sure with this being a rural discussion today, that will come up in the conversation. So again, no surprise to you guys in the room that emphasising the ownership pillar is the most effective way to tackle this, that we need to make sure we build a strong base of inclusive democratic business models in Scotland that will distribute wealth fairly, because that's what they're designed to do. So we'll get into that a lot more later, I'm sure, but I'll skip on to nature and the need for a healthy natural environment as the foundation for our economies. So I have noticed, especially since being focused on Scotland again recently, that climate and environmental concerns are not explicitly part of the 5 community wealth building pillars, and they are not part of every single conversation about community wealth building. So that it feels that there's a risk there of subordinating climate and environmental concerns in the pursuit of economic development of community wealth building. But we absolutely need to make sure that these conversations are joined up, that the environmental impacts and protecting future generations have to be an important part of redesigning our economy from the word go. So beyond that word of caution, there is a huge opportunity, I think, because we know that the next decades will see a massive economic investment in just transition. This is what Tom's going to get into in loads of detail, and I know that lots of you are also involved with renewables and other aspects of this. So we really need to look at the opportunity for embedding community wealth building principles in the rollout of green infrastructure and just transition policies in supply chains for transformation in the energy sector especially, but not just in the energy sector. So there is a risk that decision makers too often see environmental transformation and community wealth building as separate things. And I think it's a role for all of us to make sure that those dots are always connected. Dignity is the next one. A wellbeing economy has to make sure that everybody has what they need to build a good and secure life. That's stating the obvious, I hope. And it has to be part of everything we do with community wealth building as well. If the procurement we do, the businesses we build are not geared towards dignity, then we stray from the purpose of community wealth building. So not just numbers of jobs, but decent jobs, which is the fair work principle. And not just local ownership of assets, but redesigning economic relationships to ensure that dignity is embedded at every single transaction. So again, there are opportunities here, like I said, with the nature principle. There is a growing recognition that for-profit models are hollowing out our systems for providing for our needs and extracting wealth. So we wouldn't have this act if there wasn't a growing recognition of that. So when we're doing this work of redesigning the systems, we need to put ownership and dignity at the heart of redesign. Again, I think I'm preaching to the choir on that. And the last lens we all need is participation, meaningful participation as core to economic redesign. And obviously this commitment to democracy and participation is absolutely central to both community wealth building and wellbeing economy. And there obviously has been a lot of progress on community wealth building already in Scotland, but much of that has been top down so far, very much led by local authorities and Scottish Government and anchor institutions. That's not to say there's not incredible stuff going on at the grassroots, there is, but there's more we can all do to join that up. It must be owned and shaped by communities themselves, as you all know. And I think we'd all agree there's probably a lot of actors at grassroots community level who are already doing the work, but they may not be calling it community wealth building yet. So there's a lot of dot joining and narrative building to do. I read a great article on Substack last week. I'll put the link in the chat once I finish speaking. Community wealth building and the economics of inclusion. And the author there is called Irelu Nujobi. She said, community wealth building isn't just local ownership and economic control, it's redesigning power structures so that marginalised voices shape the economy and don't just participate in it. But without intentional inclusion, we'll just reinforce existing inequalities. We all also, I'm sure, already agree that participation isn't just consultation, it's shared decision making, but that's a huge shift in local governance and local democratisation that we are not there yet in Scotland. And there's a lot of resource needed and time needed to do that really well. So anchor institutions have got an absolutely critical role, but part of this is about them ceding power to communities. So for the NHS, for example, that might mean more worker cooperatives in social care that are really making decisions, not just acting as contractors and suppliers. So I will wrap up, but I'll put the cartoon back on screen again because it does cheer me up. And as I've said a few times, I'm very sure that most of my reflections today will not be new to you in this room. Many of you here are already leading the way in integrating wellbeing economy and community wealth building. But I hope that these lenses provide useful language, useful ideas, useful points for today's discussion. So basically, as we prepare to roll out and scale up community wealth building in Scotland, we've got to make sure that the integration of these concepts becomes mainstream and that we keep our eye on transforming the economic system and not scale down our ambitions on that. We're not just tweaking at the edges here, we're transforming everything, and we need to be confident about that. And we can't possibly have that wellbeing economy in the future without inclusive and democratic business models like social enterprise absolutely at the heart of it. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Tom and to getting into conversation with all of you today. So thanks for having me.